Peace to all within the sound of this broadcast. I'm on the road again, taking flight to add on a bill with a few scientists in other parts of the country and get away from the regular degular. I'm from the last century, in fact, the last millennium, a part of a generation that traveled to gain knowledge from other knowledgeable individuals who are better knowers in their fields of expertise. The lessons teach us that North America is a wilderness, wild and unscripted. And on this broadcast, I take you to the swamps of Louisiana, a state located in the deep south, also known as the Pelican State or the Boot, due to the shape of its territory. Is known to have a multicultural and multilingual heritage, a place strongly influenced by French, Spanish, and English colonizers, intermingled with natives that were already here and Africans that were brought here. The only U.S. state with political subdivisions termed parishes, which are equivalent to counties. There are many things in the Louisiana swamp that a city fella like myself find extraordinary. It is said that Louisiana wetlands took 7,000 years to form through a process called accretion, a process of growth or increase, typically by the gradual accumulation of additional layers or matter, in which the Mississippi River basin flooded, depositing sediment washed down the Mississippi River, leaving enormous deltas and vast area of coastal marsh and swamp. The weather is hot, humid, rainy, and very swampish. I took occasion tour somewhere in Lafayette,
way down in the jungle deep,
home to thousands of alligators, which happens to be a part of the tourist attraction. It is said that alligators are relatively timid and typically try to avoid humans, unless they are trying to protect their young, like this young mother alligator that put on a show for us, hissing at us, trying to scare us away from our eggs that were not too far away. Crocodiles are said to be much more aggressive and will attack humans unprovoked, yet we are unlikely to run into crocodiles in these parts. On this tour, I learned the term swamp means a flooded forest. The waters of this swamp are as shallow as 2 feet deep. Swamps are considered transition zones because both land and water play a role in producing this environment. Named after Louis XIV, Louisiana covers 52,069.13 square miles, with 43,602 square miles of land and 8,283 square miles of water. I came to these parts to build with our brother, Naj Saeed, who in addition to being a herbalist, he is also proficient in the science of iridology, the science of looking into your eyes and determining the health of your organs in your body. A very interesting science, to say the least.
So iridology is the study of the iris, the sclera, and the pupil. So basically, an iridologist is somebody who is trained to look at the different patterns in the iris, different fibers, and how they correlate to the various systems of the body, like the cardiovascular system, the skeletal muscular system, etc.
His earth added on with her science of midwifery and home birthing, giving much needed information and advice to guards and earths looking to have children.
We don't have the luxury to just put it on the black woman for her to carry that weight. We know she's carrying that 6 hectillion tons, but we need our guys to have that knowledge as well.
One of the major principles of this nation is the babies are the greatest. Yet, the business of the current medical establishment depends on us not knowing any better. So studying is paramount to the growth and development of our nation. This particular series, filmed here in Louisiana, is dedicated to the study of our health and well-being, as well as some of the rich history shared by Knowledge Saeed and the God Arabi that also gave me a limited tour of New Orleans.
Yeah, this is typical July weather in the Gulf Coast region, where you having that mixture of warm air coming out of the Gulf and that cold air, because you got to think that Canada around this time is starting to cool down, you know, and it's even cooler when you come into the month of August. The reason why you have more hurricanes in August is due to that reason, right? Because in August it's starting to get real cool out there in Canada. If that cold air pushes way down here, it mixes with that hot air in the Gulf. It just depends on which front winds. If the warm front winds, then you got a hurricane. If the cold front winds, then you might have, just a minor storm, nothing too major. But then right now what you have is that Saharan dust coming off of Africa that's messing a lot of these storms up to where they can't really form, which is good for us.
Oh, that's interesting.
The only
Never observed that.
Yeah, all of that plays a part. The only, the only problem with that is if you got allergies, it's gonna tear you up. Because you gotta worry about that pollen and that dust messing with your
sinuses and all that.
Exactly.
It rained on and off throughout my stay, yet overall, it wasn't too bad. Being in Louisiana, I had to pay homage to one of the most influential and important musicians in jazz history, Louis Armstrong, who was born and raised in the city of New Orleans in 1901. Coming to prominence in the 1920s as an inventive trumpet and cornet player, he was foundational in shifting the focus of music from the collective improvisation to the solo performance. New Orleans and Louisiana in general has a rich history. It is said that jazz was created in the 20th century by the original people of New Orleans and later expanded into different forms that we know today. The God Arabi touches on this during our ride through Louisiana from Lafayette to New Orleans. We'll come back to that at a later time in this video series. In the meantime, let's focus and build on the science of iridology, an alternative practice that much of the medical establishment and present-day academia dismisses. Iridology may not be held in high regard with the established medical system, right? I mean, could you build on that a little bit and how you see that?
Yeah, sure. So iridology is actually a very, very old science. It comes out of the eastern part of the world. It comes out of Kemet. It comes out of different parts of West Africa. It's been in parts of Asia. Original people have been utilizing this modality. The original man has been utilizing this modality for years, for centuries, for millennia. Like everything, once somebody white comes and discovers it, there's a white guy by the name of Dr. Bernard Jensen. He discovered it, right? And once he discovered it, he started, learning it and putting his own twist on it, and that's kind of how iridology got
into the Western world.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's exactly how it started to get back into the mainstay of things. Optometrists, to a degree, know a little bit of iridology. but they don't study it in the same way. But simple case in point, if you were to break an arm right now, there's a line that would show up in your eye showing that something is broken, right? You know, people who are in the field of medicine that deal with eyes know this, right? I would not say that they know everything regarding iridology, but they do know this.
Studying iridology is an interesting science. It's kind of like getting the knowledge of yourself. You just don't learn from books. You have to be educated by an educator.
The book that I have in front of me is called The Eyes of Forever Young by Dr. Paul Goss. This is the late great Dr. Paul Goss. He actually returned last year sometime, if I'm not mistaken, around April.
Dr. Paul Goss was also an herbalist and master iridologist who has helped thousands of people with issues ranging from the common cold to HIV and cancer, and taught week-long iridology classes in Arizona and North Carolina, as well as lecturing globally, and has done numerous interviews. He has since returned to his essence, yet many recordings of his lectures and classes can be found online.
Genius, man. This brother provided food, clothing, shelter for his family strictly off of his knowledge on herbs and iridology. He's helped tons of people get rid of diseases that the establishment says is incurable.
Many of us know that the medical establishment is a business, yet many of us are unaware or unclear on what the alternative is. Most only know and acknowledge what is on the surface, and usually are skeptical about the alternative solutions.
We have to also understand that at the time when medicine first started hitting the scene, as far as being mainstream, you had several things that was going on. You had several schools. One was osteopathy, then you had allopathy, you had the herbalists in homeopathy, and then you had midwifery. Allopathy was on the latter end, and it was only because of the pharmaceutical companies that allopathy took a very deeply rooted, ingrained foothold into what we call medicine, because rich, oligarch and rich, white folks basically, bought the science in order to make it mainstream. So when it comes to iridology, like everything, if it cures, they're gonna call it quackery, right? Because in fact, you won't really find me use the word cure, because cure is a term that is held in high regards to the medical establishment, right? So that's why I use the word heal, right?
Cure versus heal. Okay.
Right, because the word heal means that you are dealing with a holistic standpoint. You're transitioning from one end to another. You're bringing the body back into homeostasis, right? So that's the terminology I use. But with iridology, same thing as homeopathy, same thing as herbs. Sometimes these establishments will do their best to water down the proficiency of these systems, of these modalities, but the proof is in the pudding. Right now you have a situation where more people are dying in this country, specifically from doctors. And the number one cause of disease in America is actually medical malpractice. A lot of people don't know this, but it's the truth. Right under that is heart disease, right? Ironically speaking, when COVID hit, all of those diseases went down, and the number one cause of death was COVID. I'll just throw that out there. How is that possible?
The CDC wouldn't agree with you, but
no, the this was on their sites, right? So it's like
interesting.
Yeah, so I'm just throwing it out there, hint to the wise. If how can all these diseases like heart disease, cancer, diabetes and all these things go down unless the numbers were inflated. But I'll digress.
I was taught to take nothing on face value, yet face the value by studying and doing my own research, as we all should do.
You must do your own research, as I did.
Science is defined as observation, or a system of observations and study of general truths and laws. Science should be based on evidence drawn from examination. In this day and time, most rarely ever examine or study. Most just Google, tapping into a company that gets its main revenue from corporations that place advertisements on their platform.
The way science works in America and all over the world is like this. And this is the best way I could say how science works here in America and all over the world, it being controlled by, racism and white supremacy, right? Science works like this. It'll say, you see this shirt? It's black. If you don't believe me, we'll label you a quack or we'll take away your funding. Right? That's how science works right now, right? How science is supposed to work, it's supposed to be non-biased, right? However, it's few and far in between, right? Because anybody who thinks otherwise, all you have to do is look specifically at all the doctors and the scientists who disagree with the narrative of COVID. You can do the same thing when it comes to the narrative of AIDS and HIV. Interestingly enough, the same players that were in HIV are also in COVID, But science, as I defined it, once I studied in Ghana and Africa, science is only three things. Science is simply the idea of looking at something, right? So you
observing.
It is observing, it is experimentation and validation, right? So science is observation, experimentation, and validation. That's all science is, right? All that other stuff is just, put there in place just to, take you away from, the simplistic part of it. Observation, experimentation, and validation.
Well, the validation part, as we were just building on it, you have a bunch of people who have come together and bought the science or bought this particular sector of the observation, and now that they don't validate you, now you're crazy because they don't validate you.
Exactly.
Right. And this is the science, like the different aspects of academia. There's a certain group of people who co-sign you, and if they don't co-sign you,
exactly, you're a quack.
You're a quack.
Yeah, you're a quack, or you don't deserve any funding. This is the same thing that happened to a great scientist by the name of Peter Dunsberg. Peter Dunsberg is one of the foremost, highest reaching experts on virology. Peter Dunsberg disagreed completely, as in the midst of at least another 1,000 so scientists as well that disagreed with the narrative of HIV and AIDS, right? Peter Dunsberg also disagreed with COVID, right? But, the more and more you see the disagreements, the more and more you will find that there is backlash, just like you said, because this part of academia doesn't consider it deserving, to be considered as a legitimate study. The reason why that is because they're backed by these corporate conglomerates, right? These corporate conglomerates pay for these institutions, right? So when you go to medical school, how you gonna talk about Pfizer when Pfizer is the one that put up the money for you to get your scholarship? How you gonna do that when Merck put up the money for you to get your internship? You see what I'm saying? CNN, of course they're gonna put all this stuff out. It's sponsored by Pfizer. sponsored by. So all you got to do is start following the money, But if you start following nature, and you deal with all of which nature offers, you would find that there are, an abundance of things that can, easily remedy some of the issues that plague us as a people.
You must do your own research, as I did.
In doing my own research, I employed the God's iridology services, aiming to get a better knowledge of the procedures and understanding of how this science may relate to myself.
And what we're going to do is have a iridology session. And again, an iridology session is when a trained iridologist looks into the iris pupil of the eye. And based upon that training, you see strengths, weaknesses based upon different patterns inside of the eye. I always let people know, number one, confidentiality is of the utmost importance. There will be some things that we discuss that will be personal. Nothing that I ask you will come about arbitrarily. Everything that I ask you will come up based upon what I see in your eyes. Some of the things that we talk about will be of a very in-depth nature.
I found it to be interesting that not only did the God go into an examination and an assessment of my eyes as it relates to the organs of my body, he also took into account my psychological health.
We will talk about things regarding possibly mental, issues. We'll talk about digestion, how many bowel movements you may have, urination. If for any reason you feel that some of the questions are a little bit too deep, a little bit too personal, just let me know. We'll table it, we'll pencil it. If you feel that you want to talk about something a little later on, just let me know. We'll do that. Any questions, comments before we start?
The God identified a few things in his examination, to which I agreed and confirmed his findings. We built on the science of these things, and he suggested a few remedies to heal the issues.
Okay. So, anytime you have itis on the back of something, it means mucus. So, just like you have what is called like sinusitis, right? It means you got mucus where? In the sinuses.
All right. Is there any way to
No, you're gonna live like that forever, unfortunately. No, it's actually easy to remedy. Take a little bit of work. You gotta scrub the body, and the best scrubbers of the body I recommend is lemon juice and grapes. Those things are, lemon juice is an astringent, so think about washing dishes. How you take the washcloth when you wash dishes. Well, I don't know, some people are using sponges and stuff nowadays, but back in the day we had the washcloth and washing the dishes like that. And what you do when you got too much water and too much soap, you wring it out. So that's what a lemon does. The lemons start to wring stuff out, and it also starts to dissolve the hard areas in the mucoid plaque. So that's what you want to do. You want to drink a lot of fresh lemon juice.
not watered down, it's just
straight lemon juice. Sometimes you can also do the lemon juice and water as well, but you definitely want straight lemon juice. The more you drink it, the better off you're going to be. Grapes are extremely good. Fruit.
Any particular kind of grapes? Black grapes, the green grapes?
The dark grapes are the best. But when in doubt, get what you can find. That would be the best.
And building with the God, I learned there are certain specifics in the eye that correlate to specific organs of the body. With the God reading the structure of the eye like a clock.
And you said that you kind of read it kind of like a clock?
True indeed. So at 12 o'clock, for instance, we're talking about the pineal gland, talking about the brain. So I can tell if a person feels off balance. As you can see, the eye is looked at and shaped like a clock. And iridologists, as I've been trained, we look at the eye like a clock, and at different time coordinates, so to speak, at different o'clocks, there are different functionings. I can also tell if a person has lack of speech. So like when I say lack of speech, like if a person starts to stutter a lot, this may be important because it might also deal with different blockages in the system. Whereas say at 6 o'clock, I know I'm dealing with the leg, thigh, knee, and foot. And I'm also dealing with things that go on as far as digestion in that system at 6 o'clock. So 12 o'clock says one thing, 1 o'clock says one thing, so on and so forth. And at 3 o'clock, I may be dealing with the heart, as well as in between 2 and 3, I might be dealing with the chest and the breast area, dealing with the lungs. So there's many different things that you can find out based upon the coordinates. And in addition to that, you'll see that there are also circles within circles. And these also indicate different coordinates. And there's also things that you can find out based upon the color of the eye, the colors that manifest, in the eye. Not talking about the natural color of your eye, but other colors that are around it. And an iridologist, as I've been trained by Dr. Paul Goss, there's different things that we can be able to detect based upon those patterns, strengths, and weaknesses. Some things might be cancerous, we can detect that. Some things might also deal with lymphatic system blockages, just different strengths and weaknesses in the body. For instance, if I were to see a white film around a person's eye, I know that they're full of cholesterol. And if I see a lot of brown stuff around, I know I'm dealing with a lot of acid in the system. So this is a very good diagnostic modality, a very good modality, healing modality that you can use to help you, identify, where the body is. And how we can work to get it back into homeostasis, how we can get it back into its proper function to be at ease as opposed to a dis-ease state. 5 o'clock is the reproductive system, so you're dealing with the testes and the ovaries. Testes if you're a man, ovaries if you're a woman. And I can usually tell if a person is having some issues with, say, gallstones. If I look at a person's right eye, I can see a person having gallstone issues. That would be somewhere around 8 o'clock. And this is just the right eye, and this shows just a little bit of different things on the right eye. You can see it focuses more on the liver port. Like for this one, I can tell if I was looking at a person's right eye, I would see, the more easier whether or not that person's liver was functioning well or not. And there's also some other pictures in here of actual eyes with people having actual disease states. Some of what you, as they say in the TVs and the movies, some of what you see might be graphic. Viewer discretion is advised.
You must do your own research, as I did.
The Guard has been dealing with this science for years, months, and miles.
So I've been working with iridology since 2008. Been an iridologist since then. We had a group of about 12 of us. Out of that 12, I'm the only one still utilizing this as a healing modality or a diagnostic modality, so to speak. And iridology is one of those things where it's pretty accurate, but it's not just on, say, the systems as far as if the kidney is doing well or if the testicular portion of the body is doing well, or the ovaries. It's also dealing with mental health too. So you can tell if a person has some sort of mental illness. I couldn't tell you what. I can tell if somebody's on drugs. I couldn't tell you what type of drugs. I can tell if somebody has a propensity to deeply held beliefs.
Right. And we were building on that because that was one of my questions. Like, what is it like that? Like beliefs? Is it something like that's related to a particular part of the brain? Because you say mental illness, like is that correlates to the brain? Because we know the brain and the mind are not necessarily one and the same. But
Right. So, of course, as I've been trained, the brain is nothing but a recorder. The brain records everything. And if we go a little bit deeper, you have more than one brain. In fact, every organ has its own intelligence. Every organ has its own brain, so to speak. This adage that we've been taught that if you stump your toe, then all of a sudden it sends a signal to your brain for it to tell the rest of the body that you've been stumped. That's nonsense. It's actually European. It doesn't make sense. From the African perspective, every organ has a brain. So it has its own intelligence. And if you think about it, you got 100 trillion cells in the human body. Each one of those cells has its very own intelligence, So once we start knowing and understanding the body's intelligence, we can easily move into a better sense of health and wellness.
And so, I mean, but the actual cell or organ actually communicates with the brain, or is that something that's not?
That's a great question. That is true, but all of this synapses that you have, so to speak, it's a symbiotic relationship, right? Like, for instance, in the human body, we have gut flora. A lot of people talk about gut health. One of the main brains we have is in the gut, right? 70% of the body's immune system is in the gut. So if you keep good gut health, half of your immune system challenges will be kept at bay, right? So when we talk about, mental health, as far as me seeing if somebody, possibly has some sort of mental illness, I'm basically looking at 12 o'clock and whether or not they're having dysfunction with the pineal gland, because it takes me directly there. And usually there's a specific type of line that shows in that area, and if it shows up, I know if that person has a particular highly guarded belief. There was a client that I was working with, and I saw that, and just to test it out, I asked them, if they belong to, any type of church or anything like that, and they said they did, and they started explaining, their, I guess their church home and all this other stuff, and they were, highly religious. So I was like, wow, okay, this stuff works. And this was like when I first, started doing it.
So would you say religion is I don't want to say disease?
No. Basically what it is. No, what I would say is it's just that, because it doesn't have to be like religion, right? It could be any highly held belief. And if these highly held beliefs cause one to be out of balance, then you fall into a situation of dis-ease. Because dis-ease is dis-ease. So, quite frankly, if somebody sits up there and smacks you, technically you've been diseased, right? If you stub your toe, technically you've been diseased. The opposite of dis-ease is ease. So it's a word game that, is being played with a lot of wordology and stuff like that. But yeah.
You must do your own research, as I did.
This iridology session took place in the Birth Companion Resource Center in Lafayette, Louisiana. Owned and operated by the Earth, she stopped by, added on, and shared some much needed jewels with us.
Peace. I come in my righteous name. Divine is earth, reflecting the light of knowledge, Sayyid Allah. We rest in love Allah, or outside Lafayette, Louisiana, and Opelousas, Louisiana.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about your specialty and what you do.
Okay, peace. I am a birth worker. Currently, I am a student midwife working towards the certification, certified professional midwife, licensed midwife, specializing in out-of-hospital birth. So home births and birth center births. I've been a birth worker since 2012, so really 10 years, and kind of been on this journey of midwifery since about 2013, but was still doing, I was trained as a doula in 2012 under ICTC, the International Center of Traditional Childbearing, under Mama Shafia Monroe, and then just started doing the work. I had 2 children at the time I was trained as a doula. Now I have 4, and being a mother kind of slows and gives you some dips and things like that on your journey to, you know, get that plus lesson, but I'm still going towards it, right? So I'm currently in my apprenticeship for midwifery, studying under, which really does not happen a lot in the United States, but really being able to study under 2 certified professional midwives who are black in the state of Louisiana. So yeah, just doing that. And also I have a nonprofit called Community Birth Companion, which is a birth justice, maternal and infant health organization. And we just work to really decrease infant and maternal mortality rates through childbirth education, breastfeeding support, and community doulas. And currently we have a community doula program in which we work with mamas on Medicaid who apply to our program and is picked to work with our program in Lafayette, Opelousas, and the Baton Rouge area.
I've always heard the terms doula and midwife, yet I was unclear on the difference between the two. The God and His Earth elaborates.
Yeah, so a doula is more like a birthing companion. They just kind of help you, you know, doing things, making you at ease. Of course, the Earth would have a way better definition.
So first and foremost, we have to understand that the term doula is a living Greek word. The Greek language is not a dead language. That means servant.
Doula is somebody that is just kind of like a companion.
The work that many of us do now is categorized under doula. It was a term that started to be used by white men and white women that came out of they seeing white women being treated a certain way in the hospital system. If those of us of a certain age may remember the term labor coach, okay? And so you have this under doula, someone who's a support person. Now doula has been deemed the term for somebody who's a labor coach or support person, somebody trained to support pregnant women throughout, generally speaking, throughout their perinatal period, which is pregnancy, labor, and postpartum.
You know, and they help you with certain things, breathing exercises, you know, checking up on you even afterwards.
Now, doula can be seen almost as a marketing term. You got people saying they a deaf doula, they a tax doula, they everybody type of doula, right? But if we think about original people, what we now deem as a doula would have been somebody, maybe an auntie, another woman in the town or village that understood the supportive nature of working with woman and supporting her with just anything the mother needed and maybe the midwife needed as well.
The midwife does some of those things, but the midwife is the one that's actually helping you to plan out your birth. The midwife is also the one that's going to help you deliver the child. Doulas don't do that.
Just to make sure whether the mother was needed to walk, whether she needed a hug, a cold towel, a hot towel on her, and understanding the physiology of birth. We're dealing in a situation nowadays where you got 2 or 3 generations of women, and unfortunately black women, who may, until they have their own child, have never seen nobody give birth. So we're in a state where we need to hire out somebody called a doula, you know, but at one time that would have been somebody in your community, in your, you know, just knowing history of black folks in your church and what have you, that knew how to support women because they had done it or they had been helping since they was young. And so now we have trainings to become a doula.
A midwife has a level of education, expertise, and clock hours in the field that puts her in the scope of practice that would allow her to be licensed or certified through whatever state that they're in.
Now we have to teach our community how to advocate for themselves, because now the majority of our people, even say conscious people and people have knowledge of self, are delivering their babies in the hospital. So they have to understand how to navigate that system and how to advocate for themselves.
Whereas a doula, I think some states might have some regulation regarding that, but it's not nowhere as stringent as a midwife is.
But generally speaking, a doula is not trained to do clinical work. A doula is not trained to understand the physiology of a newborn baby to also support that baby, or a fetus to understand the growth and development of that fetus in depth that a midwife does.
So a midwife has more, is more certified, more educated. You say more, like you said, more hours in the field and
more
everything.
More hours in the field, and like I said, doulas don't deal with delivery because that's out of the scope of their practice.
Right.
And so that doesn't mean they don't always overlap, because I'm a doula, I'm a trained doula, but I no longer function in just that role because I'm going towards my midwifery practice. So a lot of it is also responsibility and legalization and licensure. There's no license for doulas. There's all type of doula trainings, and there's nothing wrong with that. Midwives just have another level of responsibility, and one of the other main differences is your midwife is your primary provider. Just like you would say your OB is the primary provider. That's the one you're going to your prenatal visits. That's the one that's checking and making sure you're measuring your stomach is measuring to the equal to or near to the gestation of your baby and how your baby is growing. That's the responsibility of the midwife. That's not necessarily the responsibility of the doula.
Almost similar to like a nurse versus the doctor.
Yeah. Definitely. That would be a good example.
Because even in saying that, nurses do clinical.
The only difference with nurses and doctors, nurses have a lot of medical knowledge.
Nurses are going to still know how to take blood. You can run labs and things like that, right?
Right. Well, depending on what kind of, because you have the LPN, the RN, and so forth and so on.
So you got a CNA. A CNA nurse is usually nurses who only have a certain amount of a smaller amount of education. That's like the lowest.
Right.
Then you have your LPN. An LPN may or may not have a college degree. Most of them have like associates, right? And then you have your RN, which is crazy. That field is I never understood why they did that, right? Because I would think that because the LPN stands for a licensed practicing nurse or licensed practitioner nurse or whatever. Right. And then the highest they got is registered. That always just was crazy to me because I would think that the highest would have been the LPN as far as the name. But
the simplest way I can say it is that the doula is the support person. That's like having an auntie in the room. You know what I'm saying? But nowadays she has to be a bit more educated about the system because of just how we live here in America. And so our doulas that's trained have to do more than just be the loving auntie that's handing you the water and wiping your brow. They have to know to say, okay, mama, we know you coming on 28 weeks. There might be some testing going on with your doctor. Make sure you have your 3 questions to ask your doctor when you go into your next visit. Things like that. Helping them write a birth plan. There are many midwives that do that same job as a doula within their services, but there are some midwives that say, hey, I really think for this particular client, they need a doula as well. And so it's really a educated support person that's helping them navigate in another way. So I can't say as a nurse, because a nurse is trained in a clinical setting and a doula is not necessarily, in most cases, not trained clinically.
It's just that doulas don't have nearly the same type of
medical experience,
as education, clock hours,
as like a RN or LPN.
Yeah, like they don't, like midwives, they learn a lot of stuff, that crosses into some of the nursing, field. They're checking all kinds of stuff. Midwives do things that, are in the field of nursing. They're not nurses. Some of them are. Some of them are nurses. But doulas, not so much.
Okay. When I first got the knowledge of self in the early years, I encountered a few brothers that assisted in the birthing of their own babies, a science that attracted me even more to this culture, knowing that we are capable of doing this for ourselves. In memory of our sister Wisdom Understanding, who also birthed babies in our nation, shared her experience in dealing with this science.
And I still advocate for home births.
Right.
And I've done 1, 2, 3. I done 4. From the same family. I don't know if you know the black family from Medina.
No.
You don't know Black Son?
Oh, I do know Black Son.
Yeah. His last 4 babies I did.
Wow.
At home.
The guard Naz Saeed assisted in the birth of 3 out of 4 of his children.
So I was, with every birth of my children, with the exception of my oldest daughter, I actually helped to deliver. So the first child, our first child, we actually got services with a midwife and a birthing center. Unfortunately, the earth came a little bit early, the baby came a little bit early, and they had a policy of at least 37 weeks, and our daughter came right at 36 and a half. So per their policy, they had to transfer us out to the hospital. Now, because of my background and everything else, I wasn't going to allow anything that I didn't want to happen. Right. So when we got up there, we also had the midwife came to accompany us. They were trying all the regular tactics, which is trying to get that money, right? Like, do you want some pills? Are you in any pain? Do you want this epidural? Well, it's gonna get worse. That type of stuff, that type of language, real deceptive.
Dealing with the medical establishment can be very daunting, especially when you aren't educated on how things should work. The God and His earth are very vocal on this topic.
Right. So allopathic medicine, the medical system, women's health system in the United States is racist. They racist, and they have very linear thinking. And that in and of itself is a what people may call a microaggression, that you think that is only one way to do a thing. And so that's very white, to think there's only one way to do a thing. It's just, it begins here, it stops there type of thing. And so that's the medical system. And they have their own sets of rites and rituals in which they do, and they think that that's the only way to do it. And so, and it's very textbook. And so if you are, whether you are white, black, Asian, what have you, and you're reading in textbooks, or you're being taught that black people got tougher skin, or black people don't feel no pain, or, different ways in which they are learning about the human body, that they may not never even see a black body until they start practicing on us, and experiencing on us as students and things like that. that's a dangerous place to be in as a black person, period, but definitely as a black woman. And so it's a good documentary that's out now on Hulu called Aftershock, and one of the sisters on there said, basically the hospital system or the birthing system in the United States is similar to, the black woman has to walk in there the same way a black man has to navigate his way when he get pulled over by the police. They're asking black women, are you on drugs? They don't either they want to give you medicine or they want to dope you up. Either they don't want to believe that you're in pain, or they want to be preemptive in you being in pain in a way that doesn't allow for birth to happen. We in a serious situation when you have doctors that are supposed to be specialized in childbirth, but they themselves throughout their whole training have never witnessed a vaginal birth, a non-medicated vaginal birth. And so if a person is trained like that, what makes you think when you go in there and you're saying, I want to have a birth plan, I got a doula, and I want to have a vaginal birth non-medicated? And this doctor ain't never had that in their whole entire training. Matter of fact, they do things like cut the women for episiotomy so they can learn how to suit her. It doesn't mean that woman even needed an episiotomy, but that's what they do to learn. So that's the system. And amongst other white countries, the United States rank low. So they rank low amongst their own people, and then we as black folk walking up in there. So that's an issue. And then you being black, going in there as a doula, when you're supporting people, you got to deal with the same sort of racism and white supremacist type of ideas, and how they talk and interact with you, even though you're supporting, a client. So it's always going to be a hurdle. Nothing's going to come easy. But we get our W's. We're not going to keep taking L's, but we get our W's.
When thinking of childbirth, hospitals are usually the first place we think of. Yet childbirths take place in a variety of places, including but not limited to hospitals, birthing centers, and at home. Without the proper knowledge of childbirth, we tend to put our trust in the medical establishment, often putting ourselves and our loved ones at risk. Knowing our options can afford us to do better.
Okay, so as far as different locations for birth, most people understand and have heard of hospital birth. Then next is birth center birth. Some hospitals may say they have a birth center, but if it's within the hospital, it's just it's still a hospital birth. It's just maybe a special wing of the hospital that may have some nicer suites, some larger suites, may have a pool or a tub in which you can birth or labor in. Then you have the birth center. The birth center generally is supposed to have a more homey setting, but still has a lot of the benefits of a hospital. Some people, that's their middle road. They are maybe not comfortable just yet of having a home birth, but a birth center birth feels more comfortable to them. And usually that is manned by a certified professional midwife or a certified nurse midwife. Sometimes you're in states in which a doctor may own it, but it's still run by midwives. Okay. Then the home birth setting, usually families that are using the home birth setting have a midwife, or sometimes they're doing it unassisted. They're doing it themselves. And that just means that they're birthing at home, which for generations, many people did. It wasn't nothing you're going to get a cookie for and but now, it's different. So people have options in laboring, especially if they are low risk. And so depending on the state, because all 50 states, their laws are not the same. So depending on the state, like for instance, we're in Louisiana. Louisiana says that if you are expecting twins, if you are trying to do a VBAC, which is vaginal birth after having cesareans, that you are not a candidate for an out-of-hospital birth. But if you go in the other direction and go to Texas, you possibly can have a VBAC or could have birth twins or could birth breech babies. And so different states have different laws, and you have a place like Mississippi where it has almost no regulation, which can be a gift and a curse, right? And so it just depends on where you go.
In general, the most common birthing position is the lithotomy position. a position for surgical procedures and medical examinations involving the pelvis and lower abdomen. The guard shares his expert opinion on this position.
And excuse the description, but I've never done this, and I'm sure nobody else has. But imagine trying to have a bowel movement on your back. That would be uncomfortable.
Right.
Now imagine a human being
Right.
supposed to be pushed out, right? Just like the first example would be difficult, imagine the difficulty it would be to pass a human being from a woman's womb. It doesn't make sense.
Right.
Unless they are simply doing this so that they can cause trauma, because trauma sells. Trauma sells. That's where they get that money from. So even though the United States is considered the most industrial nation on earth, other nations who are considered third world, we have the highest cesarean sections. And we have the highest amount of infant mortality rates, right? So more children die in America, the most industrial place on earth, and black children and black mothers die at an alarming rate because of these procedures, these policies, these procedures, these tactics to get, more money.
As far as positioning in births, there's all type of positions that you can be in when you labor. It's different type of positions you can be in when you labor, even when you're in a hospital. The difference is in an out-of-hospital birth, those different positions are generally encouraged, okay? So that's another thing that doulas can help with, along with midwives, but doulas can help with is different positionings, that only managing pain management, but just allowing positions in which the baby can engage further under the pelvis and on top of the cervix so it can come down. And it's a bunch of different positions, but what they have in common is that they're going to support gravity and they're going to support the pelvis opening up so that baby can be in the best position possible. In the hospital setting, you have to really work to try to birth in different positions, because what's better for the nurse and what's better for the obstetrician is for you to be on your back. And that kind of defies, gravity, but it makes sense to them because they can see everything because you're on your back, right? But that's not always the best way to birth, especially if a baby is in a bad position, not being able to move around, and either having an epidural or being given Pitocin or something like that are some of the many things that just add on to what they call the slippery slope of interventions that cause a cesarean. And so, not saying you can't have a vaginal birth in the hospital. My first child, we had to transfer from the birth center to the hospital because my water broke early for the birth center. Another thing about birth centers have different regulations than home birth. And so birth center, because of their insurance, generally speaking, they may not be able to allow you to birth if you go earlier than 37 weeks. That's maybe an automatic transfer. And so we were like 36 in some days. My water broke and I was in labor. So I had to be transferred. And so we ended up having our baby vaginally. I didn't have any meds, but I did have all my prenatal care with the midwife. So it was one of those things where I knew what type of birth I wanted to have and had that support and had that care. That just happened to have my baby in the hospital setting. So it's not impossible, but you got to definitely go in there educated.
When you know better, you do better. The God and His earth has prepared their knowledge and wisdom and their education very well.
I ain't got no choice, because if you understand that, look, the devil do what he's supposed to do. The devil do what he's supposed to do. So if you know that the devil is doing what he's supposed to do, you got to get on your job. And so you just always have to be on point. You have to be aware and kind of, even when you think you can put your guard down, you got to pick it back up. You got to just get back on your square, because the idea, especially for black people, black women, especially birthing in the South. And that's everywhere, but definitely in the South is they don't expect you to know the language. They don't expect you to be educated or to ask questions. Just to ask, which is what they're supposed to do. Anytime you go, and I'm talking to the brothers too, the guys, this not just for the earths. When y'all go into the hospital for whatever, you're supposed to ask questions. Their job, they're putting on their notes that they explained something to you. That's what they're charting. So why not ask questions and make them do their work job? That's their job, is to explain to you what's the next procedure. Let's do some quote unquote shared decision making. That's something that they like to use. Shared decision making me as a patient, we're doing patient-centered care. That's another term they like, patient-centered care, where look, you need to pay attention to not only what I might be complaining about, whatever is the issue or health ailment I have, but what is my culture saying about this? What am do I have any apprehensions about this? So as a provider, you need to take that all into play before you say, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to cut this off, we're going to put you on these meds, this, and the other. And so I'll leave y'all with an acronym that we tell our mamas. We tell our mamas right here where we talk about, whether we're talking about breastfeeding, labor, postpartum, birth control, whatever. It's called BRAIN. BRAIN, okay? B, when you talk to your doctor, your provider, what's the benefits of this procedure? I don't care if it's about drinking water, medication, whatever. What's the benefits? R, what's the risk? What's the risk of me doing it? What's the risk of me not doing it? A, is there any alternatives? Okay, is that the only way to do it? Right? What alternatives do I have? I, what is my intuition saying? What's my gut? Intuition is that first knowledge. The old folks say, what's your first? Go with your first mind. That's knowledge. Your immediate, what you took on that you respected, what you saw. You know what I'm saying? What does your intuition say about the thing? And then N, is this negotiable? Is this something we have to do now? Or is it a no? So with everything, if you use that brain, you're going to be better off when you are engaged. And I don't care if it's with the dentist. I don't care if you're going somewhere and getting your child tested for ADHD, autism, whatever. Brain, you can use in all those systems. That's their job, to explain to you, to do individualized care and make sure you're better for it. And if you find a doctor that doesn't want to answer no questions, you have options. It doesn't matter if you have private insurance or Medicaid. That's why that number is on the back of that Medicaid card. Call that number and you tell them, this doctor that's in y'all network, I asked questions and they didn't want to answer no questions. Or I've been complaining about headaches and this, that, and other, and the nurse didn't want to bring me in to check my blood pressure or this, that, and other. Tell them that, because they're gonna follow up with that doctor, but we not saying nothing. We fussing amongst each other, talking about, oh, that doctor not no good, or he cut you, or this doctor, they took my baby's tooth out the wrong way. We talking amongst each other, but we not telling the insurance companies, because it's about money with them. So we need to know and understand what we have and the tools that we have to make a difference in our health. We are not a dumb people, but we often do not use the tools that's in front of us that we do have access to.
You mentioned about having a C-section and then going back to the vaginal, because I know for sure, I know people who have C-sections and they're under the mind frame that they can't ever have a vaginal. I know somebody that had like 4 C-sections thinking that she can't have a vaginal. Can you kind of break that down a little bit? So not knowing everybody's individual case, because there's individual cases in which a person may need to have a cesarean, okay? The white man did not invent the cesarean section, okay? That being said, that is a serious procedure. And it's being used really willy-nilly in the American medical system. So, once a C-section does not mean always a C-section. What I would tell women who may be looking to have a vaginal birth or just want to understand really why you had the C-section or what was your, how did that procedure really go? Go to the doctor or go to the hospital, call them and find your operative report.
You want to see your operative report because you want to see and know where was the cut. And we're not just talking about the cut on the outside. The important part is the cut on the uterus, because that's going to make a big difference on where you get to see if you'll be a candidate for a vaginal birth. They are concerned about in the hospital setting, uterine abruption, with cesareans. If you've had your babies like back to back to back, they steppers. Like you got pregnant, and by the time you had your 6th week or something, you pregnant again. You might not be a candidate for a vaginal birth because you just had a cesarean section. You might not be. But when we talk to some older sisters that might be 60 years old or something, sometimes they tell us, oh, I had a vaginal birth, I had a C-section, I had a vaginal birth. It wasn't just automatic. But like we have a local hospital that'll tell mothers, we don't support C-section, VBACs here. So if you go to that hospital, you're going to get a C-section if you've already had a C-section. So you have to have that option, a vehicle or whatever, that's going to take you to the next town, to Lafayette, because they have hospitals there that do support VBACs if you're a candidate. So what I would tell mothers and families that may be looking into is, okay, why did I really have that C-section? Did I go to the hospital too early and I really wasn't in labor and then they had me on my back? Or did they induce me when I didn't need to be in labor yet? Again, at the hospital, too early, the baby in a bad position because the baby wasn't ready, but now you're on your back. Now they done bust your water, and once that water is bust, now you're on a time clock. You got 24 hours to go into labor. At the 12th hour, they checking, maybe putting you on PIT, increasing the PIT. Now, guess what? Now they saying your baby has D cells, as far as the heart rate, and to the doctor, this doesn't look good. Your baby's having D cells. I don't like the way it looked. Guess what? We need to have a C-section. Okay? Is the baby's cord short and wrapped around too long, and you're not in the best position to birth your baby? And now, it's all type of things that will be the reason why you have the C-section. But what you want to know, if you don't have the operative report, then you don't have the information you need to give to a midwife or give to another physician that may be VBAC friendly. So get that knowledge on what happened during the C-section, what caused the C-section, even if what they put on your chart isn't what really happened, because that happens all the time. But you want to be able to see that and know that, so then you can move accordingly.
In my own experience, during the pregnancy with my son, the umbilical cord was wrapped around his neck. It was suggested that his mother have a C-section, and at the age of 22 years old, I was unaware of the options and didn't know what to do other than follow the doctor's instructions. I asked the nurse about the alternatives.
It really depends, because we've seen babies in a birth center setting or a home birth setting that may have had the cord wrapped around, but the cord was long enough, it was wet enough, all the midwife did was slip it from over the child's neck, right? But again, they're birthing in a certain position. They've walked. They went into labor on their own. They are 39, 40 weeks, 41 weeks. The baby is on top of the cervix. As the baby is coming down, the baby is coming down with the cord. So the baby is being birthed, and all you got to do is move it. So it's also, what led to that, to the mom being in the hospital setting? Was the mama full term? Was she induced? Was the baby ready? Was the baby on top of the cervix? All those type of things, because the cord being wrapped around in and of itself does not all the time mean that that's an emergency. But it's always like, what's missing? What else? What was the what else?
Yeah, because at the time I didn't know. So and not knowing, it's like being in that position, it's just like, well, what do I do?
And I feel like that's the main difference between the midwifery model of care and what happens in the hospital, because we want to welcome the daddies in. That's when the daddy, you part of the birth team. Right. This is what's going on here. We want to welcome you to ask questions, all that type of stuff. And in the OB setting in the hospital, they even wait for fathers to use the bathroom to come in the room and start getting the mama to do something that the mama and the husband, done said, or the partner done said they wanted to do. Then they, oh, daddy, go ahead and go get you something to eat. And then while you done got something to eat, they in there, and you done come back, she done got epidural, all type of stuff that y'all had said y'all wasn't going to do. And they waited, and they're very strategic. They strategically wait until you left. I will tell men, and especially our brothers, stand by the bed. If the doctor always comes to the door on one end, you stand on the end where you can be facing the doctor, but close to the mama, not to the foot of the bed, but up here by the mama. If anybody comes in and your wife, woman, whoever is undressed, her legs is up and everything, you need to tell her, oh, who is this? You the man in there. All of a sudden, you don't stop being the man of your woman because you in a hospital setting. That's disrespectful to just come into a room and you got a black woman legs in stirrups, you got white men in and out, whoever in and out, they not announcing themselves. It might be respiratory team, which they have on staff, which is totally fine. But if he enters the room, he needs to say, hey, respiratory, I'm John, do y'all need me? Because he doesn't necessarily have to be in the room, he could be at the door. Unless they done signaled something like, is mom a smoker? Is this a premature baby? Is this something and then they need to be telling you, hey, we're going to have respiratory in the room just in case when the baby is born, we need to do some resuscitation on the baby, right? But we need to understand that we deserve respect as humans, period. And we're still living in a day and age that as black people, we're not seen as humans. Or it doesn't matter that your legs wide open. It doesn't matter that she may be undressing or she might be dealing with a decision she didn't know she had to make. And they're not allowing you to have that time and they just bring people in. I'm really encouraging brothers to speak up, talk to your woman, and when y'all got them times to talk by yourself and say, hey, I'm gonna ask this question, or you want me to remind you about this question, didn't you have a question on this, that, and the other, so she can remember to speak up, for things that y'all have spoke about or y'all have questions about. And don't let those people do that thing where they think that, you being intimidated because you speak with your hands or whatever like that. If you got a question, you're going to ask it, because when the white men in there and they got a question about their wife, they ask. And they say what they want to say.
As mentioned before, the God and Earth have developed their knowledge, wisdom, and education to a degree where they are able to help others as well as make a living.
What sparked you to take this path?
I got caught up on, this was the same age again, on Yahoo. Just, surfing the net. And I came across the ICTC webpage. And that was the International Center for Traditional Childbearing. It no longer has another name now. Mama Shafia has her own business. But it just had like buku information on black midwives. And I could not get off the webpage. And remember, back in the day, a webpage would have links and links to all type of stuff. You'd hit one link and go into just delve into something else. And I could not. I just kept returning. My mother had always told me that, my grandmother had her two oldest children at home before she moved up to Chicago. My mother was the first child my grandmother had that was delivered in the hospital. And so my mother, with my baby brother, she had a midwife in the hospital setting. So here, the word midwife wasn't foreign to me, but I just couldn't shake it. And I remember telling Knowledge at the time, I said I had already looked up the birth center that was in Lafayette. We hadn't even had no children yet. I was like, okay, this is the birth center we gonna go to, just all of that. And I just knew that was something I eventually wanted to do. And really, me becoming a doula was just a stepping stone for me to go towards midwifery, because the reality was I wanted to know if I could handle being on call, if this was really something I wanted to do, work with mamas in that setting, and then just really knowing as well about the infant mortality and maternal mortality rates of black women and babies in the United States, or how we was dying. And how we're dying in this setting, and not just dying, it's just not mortality rates, it's morbidity rates. Women going in a postpartum period, they done said, hey, I've been feeling my chest hurt, this, that, and the other. You went in with 4 limbs. now you leaving out the hospital with just 2 or 1 because of how they've let sepsis sit in or whatever. You know what I'm saying? So it's not even that we just dying, but the wounds we're having because of the hospital system and what they're doing on our bodies after we've been, we become a victim of that said system. And I just wanted to stop that.
Ironically, the earth became more interested in wanting to explore this line of work from involving herself in one of her other passions, which was genealogy. So she got really into genealogy because I would also talk about genealogy. That's another thing I should probably talk to Bill with you about too.
Okay.
And then I end up finding out after we had our 3rd child at home, our 2nd child at home, I found out that indeed my grandmother's grandmother was a midwife.
She was able to trace some relatives, a great grandmother or something, who's actually a midwife.
And she caught my grandmother's children. And so I was like, okay, so that's why I couldn't shake it. So it's in my blood to do this work.
So she chalked that up to, okay, I got it in the blood, it's in the DNA. Maybe this is why I have an interest in this.
And so I'm happy to do it. It's not easy, but even if I didn't get paid for it and I did once every year, I would do one every year. You know what I'm saying? A birth.
And so she took that kind of as a sign that, this is a work that she should, go forward in.
And so I'm just happy to be on this journey.
She's been doing well with it. She's been able to provide help to a lot of people in the Black community and the community as large, provide free services to our people, through grants that she's written, grants that she's gotten because she hasn't wrote a grant, but people see the works, so she's done, a lot of great work, with that.
Peace. Is there any advice that you would give to sisters out there that are looking to embark on this journey, or just sisters in general that's in the nation?
Peace. I would love for the queens and the earths of this nation to get back into natural birth. And I don't want to this is not, I'm going to say this is like the knowledge culture degree. It's not just to the queens. It's for the guys and the earths, okay? Get back to being autonomous with our health, period. And that includes how we birth our babies. It's a sister in New Orleans that says, Nicole Deggans, and one of her famous taglines is, birth is the revolution. If that baby is birthed in a peaceful setting, the way in which they come into the earth is peaceful, phenomenal. And Queen Shamika says when the God and earth have babies, those are atomic babies. You know what I'm saying? And so why are we having our atomic babies in the hospital unnecessarily? Okay? Because we do have some high-risk families. But we should be doing that childbirth education. Get educated on what childbirth looks like, okay? Don't be too cheap to invest in a childbirth education class. Find a free childbirth education class. Get a doula. Invest in a doula. Invest in the time to, even if the birth or pregnancy wasn't planned, to educate yourself on how to advocate and what should happen in a normal birth and a normal pregnancy and a normal postpartum period. So when something happens outside the norm, you can understand what's going on and really reach out for someone to help you with those said needs. And for sisters that want to embark on this journey, it's so many queens that's in the medical field, that's birth workers in the nation. Reach out to those sisters, even if they're not in your particular cipher. And just sometimes you just gotta learn. Everybody don't need to be at the perineum. Everybody may not need to catch the baby, right? Maybe you don't want to write the articles. Maybe you're somebody who wants to be a lactation counselor. Maybe you want to do prenatal massage. It's all type of ways in which you can support birthing families and people who are, the mamas that's having babies in so many different ways. So it's not just the doula or the midwife. We need I need to be able to provide a black chiropractor to some of my clients who are learned in the way of doing like the Webster method, the method in which for pregnant mamas. It's not a lot of black chiropractors that do that. It's not a lot of black massage therapists that's doing womb massage that we can refer our mothers to as far as while they're pregnant. So it's all different type of ways in which to support pregnant families, laboring families, and those in a postpartum period. So just don't, pigeonhole yourself to one or two things to learn. We're in need of competent black women in all of those fields, and black men, guys. We need y'all as chiropractors and massage and doing body work too. It's time out. We don't have the luxury to just put it on the black woman for her to carry that weight. We know she's carrying that 6 hectillion tons, but we need our guys to have that knowledge as well. It's serious in that hospital system, and we can't just put it on her. She's already gonna be bearing life. She's already dealing with all of that. So you have to be educated as well. So we need the guys, anything that come about. If you're in your childbearing years, if you're still in your years where you feel like you can father a child, then if you could be somebody, pawpaw, granddaddy, goddaddy, whatever, you should be knowledgeable about what's going on, because a lot of the changes that happen in the system or decisions that our pregnant mothers make, it's not because of the midwife or the OB. It's because of what her grandmama said, what her husband said, what her friend said, and if they uneducated, now she's going behind what they said. So the community, the village, the cipher has to be educated. The health of our nation is tied to the health of our babies and women. When you go and you're in these meetings with these hospitals and with your counties, parishes, and state, they look at the health of the children and the women to determine what the health of that city and state going to be from years from now. That's how they write their history in advance with the knowledge they have of the health of our black.
It's interesting to be in the swamps of Louisiana, building with the God Nile Saeed.
I'm building with the God in Mecca. He's out here in Louisiana. As you can see, we got
the swamp in the background.
Well, close to it. Close to it. We got the Vermilion River in the back. You can't see it, but behind that is another little area called Vermilionville. It basically studies set up for like Creole culture, Cajun culture, and all that.
There was so much to build on, yet we didn't get to cover everything in this particular trip. However, we touched on as much as we could.
We can build a little bit more on herbs and stuff.
Yeah. And I wanted to touch on the kitchen herbs.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So we can definitely talk up on the kitchen herbs. We can cover cayenne pepper. We can cover things like nutmeg. We can cover bay leaf. We can cover basil, which is another good herb. Cinnamon is another good herb that's in the kitchen. Black pepper, turmeric. Okay. These are good kitchen herbs that can help you to remedy against problems. Oregano is very, very good. Oregano is very good.
Oregano, fresh oregano, as well as
and thyme.
Okay.
Thyme is another one.
We walked through this environment and I identified a few plants, how they relate to us, and their medicinal values.
Yeah, peace, God. So, right here is this is a pecan tree, and doesn't quite look like a pecan yet because it's still in the early stages. You could tell by the green shell, so to speak. But eventually, it will fall off, and you'll have a full-fledged pecan.
Pecan.
Y'all call them pecans, we call them pecans.
Pecans.
Right?
Okay.
Of course, with pecans, the other thing you can do, you take the wood if you like to cook, especially on the grill. You can use pecan wood
The wood of the actual
plant.
of the plant. Okay.
Of the tree. You can use that to cook with. You know, as far as grilling. The other thing too, with pecans, if you were to soak them and drink the water, not as much as say walnuts are, but with walnuts, if you were to take walnuts, shell them, and put the walnuts in water and let them sit overnight, you can drink the liquid, and it'll act as a anti-parasite concoction, help to get the parasites out your system.
This is just out here. This is just.
Yeah, it's just out here. Trying to see if they got any other interesting herbs that are out here while we're here.
While in these parts, I kept seeing these trees with a hair-like substance hanging from its branches. I haven't seen trees like this anywhere else in my travels. The guard Knowledge Saeed elaborates.
This is Spanish moss. Spanish moss is kind of like an air plant. It grows on other plants.
In doing my own research, I've learned that Spanish moss isn't really a moss at all, nor is it native to Spain. It is an organism that grows on the surface of a plant and derives its moisture and nutrients from air, rain, and water. It takes part in nutrient cycles and adds to both diversity and biomass of the ecosystem in which they occur.
Spanish moss grows on different types of trees.
So it's an addition to the actual tree.
Right. The tree doesn't produce it. The Spanish moss just grows on it.
Okay, so then what is that considered? Like, it's not considered like a fungus or something, or?
It's not a fungus. It's almost like a parasite, almost.
So Spanish moss is a parasite.
Almost. It's like.
So it needs a host, basically.
Yes, that's the best wording probably. The tree acts like a host to the Spanish moss.
It's not so much a parasite in that it grows on the host for physical support and does not necessarily affect the host negatively. Spanish moss has been used for various purposes. They are an important source of food to many species.
So Spanish moss is pretty much used by, cleaning it, and then you could make it into a tea. It's very good for diabetes.
Spanish moss has been used for various purposes, including building insulation, packing materials, mattress stuffing, fibers, and more. Typically, the older plants of the tree will have more of this so-called moss growing on them.
Very, very good for diabetes. Some other things. It'll help with colds a little bit too.
Spanish moss.
Spanish moss.
Okay,
the white stuff, these are clover.
White clover is an edible weed and has many uses along with different benefits. It is related to the legume, pea, or bean family.
White clover is very good for the body. Does different things. A lot of people just cut their grass and throw it to the side.
The white clover plant is an excellent companion crop that can grow along with lawn grasses. It is a perfect place for honeybees to get pollen along with nectar. Honey made from white clover is called clover honey. It is a rich source of protein and has antioxidant and anti-rheumatic properties.
It's very good vitamins and minerals for the body. I don't know.
Do you know of any in particular vitamins and minerals that you might look out for with
I would definitely say vitamin A.
The sewer drainage being so close gives caution to these particular plants. Yet it's peace to be able to identify them when I see them. The knowledge the guard has on herbs found in the field is extremely valuable. A discipline passed on from his old dad, who is also a herbologist. I didn't get to build with his old dad this trip. Perhaps I'll get the opportunity the next time I'm out here.
So my father started off showing me different herbs in the yard. Easy stuff was like dandelion.
Being out here, I had to be mindful of poisonous plants, such as poison ivy. which I learned isn't poison to everybody.
No, everybody not allergic to it like that.
So some people can just actually touch poison ivy and.
Yeah, it depends. Like most of the time, people who can do that, they've been around it so much that it doesn't really bother them too much. There even are some people who actually ingest small amounts.
Poison ivy is a type of allergenic plant native in these parts. It was once considered a single species. Now poison ivies are generally treated as a complex of separate species. Not everyone is affected by this plant in the same way. Those that are affected suffer from an itchy, irritating, and sometimes painful rash. The rash is caused by a liquid compound in the plant's sap. Despite its common name, it is not a true ivy, but rather a member of the cashew and pistachio family.
I put it to you like this. Plants that are poisonous, some plants, even though they're poisonous, can be utilized as a medicine. Plants that are medicines can turn into poisons depending on the application. You know, but all of that right there is poison ivy. All of it is poison ivy.
Everything on this tree is poison ivy.
Everything green with those leaves like that, those 5 leaves that you see, the 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the 5th one pointed like that, that's all poison ivy.
Interesting. Particular variations of the plant is commonly eaten by many animals, and the seeds are consumed by birds. Yet poison ivy is often thought of as an unwelcome weed.
Poison ivy is attached to a vine that's growing on the tree. If you look at the poison ivy close, you'll see it attached to a vine, right? But if you look back at that tree and you see there's some other leaves growing on the branches, the big trunks of the branches of the tree, like right here, that's actually called resurrectus.
So the ones on the vine is poison ivy.
Correct. And this is called resurrectus plant.
The ones on the side.
Yeah, the ones, if you're looking straight here, like right where my arm is.
Oh, straight up, going straight up.
Yeah, like right, like look, like right here. Like look at my thumb. And then, you see what I'm talking about? Right there. All of that is called resurrectus. When it's not raining, it's dead looking. Right? It looks like this brownish grayish thing, and then when it rains, it comes up. So
resurrectus, man.
Yeah, resurrectus.
Peace, God.
Take some of those little balls that they got forming on the tree, and you put them, and even some of the leaves, and you put them in like a little dish, you know, it'll have your house smelling good.
Oh yeah.
You can use it as potpourri.
Okay. Do you know the name of this, right?
I don't know the name of this tree. I forgot. And my father, they better have certain types of trees in my. Although I will say we had one of these in our yard. Of course, it wasn't never this big.
You must do your own research, as I did.
The cycles of life are much more apparent in the wild.
Otherwise, a dead animal in that water.
Oh shit.
What is that?
That is a dead animal. That looks like a dog.
Yeah, it might be. And then the gator's gonna get to it.
God damn, man.
The gator is about to get to it.
Is there gators in there?
It will be.
It will be.
So it's gonna get cleaned up. But you also want to be mindful about being out here, because you see that big spider?
Oh shit! I didn't even peep that. I didn't even peep that.
Everyone is trying to eat and survive in this world. Beware and be careful of the opportunities where you can be eaten and consumed by a wild beast, as mentioned in the 28th degree.
Birthplace of jazz was in Tremaine. That was, like I say, that's the oldest black neighborhood in Louisiana, in New Orleans, because that was where emancipated black folks were first able to purchase land. You know, they bought their homes, got a lot of old homes there that have been passed on from generation to generation. know. That's also where you have Storyville. And Storyville was like the red light district. You know, where you had the prostitution, the whorehouse, the brothels, and I guess jazz was not only the music that kept you preoccupied until your turn came up. So it was played in the whole houses, but it was also played in the juke joints. And you had this one cat, Billy Bolin, who is the father of jazz music.
That's the movie I was into, though. The movie I watched on Amazon Prime.
Yeah, Billy Bolin. Yeah, that was Billy Bolin. He's the father of jazz music. The only thing, they don't have any recorded music from him. So all you have is those cats like Jelly Roll Morton and Louis Armstrong, who paid homage to him, who actually seen him play, you know, or, you know, some musicians who might have played with him, right? But the dude was, you know, the whole improvisation. The reason why Louis Armstrong, when he played music, he would hide his fingers so you wouldn't see the notes. Oh, that's Billy Bolin. That's where they got it from. You know, because they ain't want cats, you know, to copy or, you know, the original biters. You know what I'm saying? How you kept cats from biting? You would hide your fingers so they wouldn't see the notes that you was playing. Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, you had cats biting way back in the days, but that's how you kept them from biting. So you had that, and the people who had a problem with Billy Bolin and jazz musicians was the church and white folks. Now, the reason the church had a problem with it is because the men, instead of them bringing their money home and paying tithes to the church, they would go to the juke joint and buy liquor and prostitutes. So the church had a problem with that, right? That was the reason they had a problem with jazz music. But the reason the white folks had a problem with jazz music was because, once again, those workers, from being in those juke joints all night in the prostitution, you couldn't get up and come to work the next day, right? So you wouldn't get the job done. So they had a problem with Billy Bolin. So much so that the cops and other politicians, businessmen, constantly messing with him, arresting him, putting him in jail, roughing him up. A lot of the jazz musicians would get roughed up. They would get beat up. They would get thrown in jail, you know, because of what they was doing. And they had, like I said, they had the support of the black church, the black preachers.
Wow. So the black preachers were basically empowering these other white folks, messing with
Well, they was giving the white politicians, like, I got a problem with them too. So that just kind of, you know, justified the handling of black musicians, right? And Billy Bolin, unfortunately, due to some of his exploits, some would say that he might have had syphilis or some other venereal disease that eventually affected his mind, and he ended up dying in the mental hospital in Mandeville, right, which is, to my knowledge, is still open.